I'm Pat Dooris, and welcome to The Story. Tonight, an update on contaminated water in Oregon, specifically Eastern Oregon near the city of Boardman. As questions swirl about the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality's inability to stop pollution from getting worse, the agency's director sits down with me for a one-on-one. That is our big story tonight. Before we get too far here, I want to tell you that you should care about this topic and this discussion, whether you live near the site or not, whether you live in Oregon or not. It involves nitrate contamination in aquifers. Those are the huge pools of water under the ground. It's happening all around Oregon and really all around the country. The nitrates come from farm fertilizers and other sources, and they're bad for your health. They seep down through the soil. Some is used by plants, but some gets past the plant roots and goes all the way down to the aquifer. In many areas, people with backyard wells pull up that nitrate-laden water, and then they use it without knowing it's contaminated. That's happening near Boardman, Oregon, where as many as 10,000 people have access to backyard wells in the contaminated areas. The state of Oregon is now making free drinking water available to many people, but some are still at risk. I did several stories on the issue last November. They are all posted for you to watch on our KGW YouTube page. After working on the story for months, though, one thing really did astound me. The state of Oregon has known about the problem near Boardman for more than 30 years. There have been lots of studies and meetings, but no mandatory actions to stop the pollution from getting worse. And it is worse, more than 30 years ago. The Department of Environmental Quality is the ultimate protector of groundwater. I asked the DEQ's director, Leah Feldon, why the agency has not solved that problem. And according to the history on the site, it says that the purpose is restoring and improving groundwater quality by decreasing nitrate concentrations to less than 7 milligrams per liter, which it's not even close to doing. So is it working?
Yes. So DEQ's been monitoring over the years, and I think you're aware of that. You've seen a lot of our data, and that's exactly right. That's what our data is showing. It's not a good story over the last
it's getting worse.
30 years of collected data. Yeah.
How can that be?
Right. For the most part, I would say a lot of the levels, we test certain areas and they're okay. Other areas are not, and we know that domestic wells are at levels that are not safe for drinking water. So I would say DEQ's role over this time period has been that sampling, the analysis. We put out annual reports about the contamination levels. We send the results to the domestic well owners so that they are aware. We notify the counties, we notify the legislature. So we've been in the area, we've been doing this. You're right, things are not improving. And so I think what's really happening today is a concerted effort to bring in more agencies to look at more diverse authorities.
I found the Director Feldon, to be well-versed in what is happening in the Tainted Waters near Boardman. And I should also tell you that I've edited some of her comments for brevity. She told me she visited the area to see it for herself and that she plans to go back again next month. I wanted to push her, though, more on what is and is not happening there and why a state-run committee that's supposed to help solve the problem has been so spectacularly ineffective. I think part of the reason is obvious. It's been stacked with people from the industries that benefit and government folks. In 30 years, they've only suggested voluntary steps for industry to stop the contamination. But back to the Lubguama, they've been meeting for almost 30 years.
The advisory committee.
Yep. They've come out with 2 reports, both recommending voluntary steps.
Yes.
In sort of the magical hope that things will get better, and it's still not getting better. Is that committee is it even worthwhile? Should they even be meeting? Because they give the appearance of doing something when in fact nothing is changing.
I appreciate that question. I think working with the committee, to me, is an area I've identified that where I would like DEQ to improve. It is a state advisory group, and so let's look at what are the regulatory mechanisms that we're already doing. The committee is permitted to suggest more regulatory mechanisms for agencies to potentially carry out. And so far, as you say, it's been voluntary mechanisms.
Yeah, which are clearly not working. And there's been some criticism that the committee in the past, and still to some extent today, is loaded with industry people that have a dog in the fight and maybe don't want things to change.
Yeah, well, we recognized actually a couple years ago that the makeup of the committee may not be conducive to all of the solutions that we're seeking.
All right, so the committee studying the problem over the decades is made up mostly of people who benefit from what's happening there. Part of the problem near Boardman is that the soil also is extremely sandy and the water just goes right down through it. State reports show that farmers are responsible for nearly 70% of the nitrates that contaminate the water near Boardman. They are not regulated, by the way, and they can use as much fertilizer as they want. A smaller amount of contamination comes from the high-profile Port of Morrow. It collects nitrate-contaminated water from food processors which use their property. It recently got a $2 million fine from DEQ for a series of permit violations in which they dumped way too much nitrate-laden water onto farm fields. And then turning to some of the things that you do regulate,
yes.
The Port of Morrow, it's an easy target, it's public, all that stuff is documented. Yeah. How is it that the DEQ allowed them to violate their permits so many times for so many years before kind of calling them on the carpet?
Well, so the port has been regulated for many years. You know, what's to my understanding, what's really occurred is just quite a bit of expansion in the last 15 years in particular. So we first started seeing violations in terms of excess nitrogen loading in 2010. So they did receive a notice of permit violation at that time, and that's really what started the cycle of enforcement. We've issued 4 penalties to the port since that time. So most people are really thinking about the most recent one, the big one, the $2.1 million penalty, which is one of the 3 highest penalties this agency has ever issued in its entire history. But there were 3 penalties prior to that and several orders from the department that related to upgrades to their systems, better monitoring, and better reporting, and really asking the port to get their arms around the system that they are. They are a wastewater treatment system that hasn't employed treatment yet, if you will, right? It's a land application system, and that's allowed. That's allowed by law, but the rate of the application is what has been at issue, and
especially in that type of soil.
In that type of soil. In that type of soil. Absolutely, you're right. That's the crop uptake is critical in that area to ensure, and that's what we've really done recently with the port, is in a very directive way, very much dialed in precisely on every field, you know, how much they can be applying and requiring reporting for every field, requiring that treatment facilities are in place.
But even now you're allowing them to spread during the winter when the uptake is very small. And even with that, they're still violating the permits. It's getting down farther than it's supposed to.
There are some new aspects to that, though. The winter irrigation is only allowed for another winter cycle. And so what we've done with the permit renewal.
Sorry to interrupt, but why allow it at all? The people out there are saying, look, this is a poison that's affecting our water. You're making us sick. Why not just stop it?
It's a very logical question. It's one I would have myself as a member of the community. I would definitely have that question as well. So to best explain that, so the port is taking in all of this industrial wastewater, as we know, from food processors, and you know, it's a connection to all of the agricultural businesses really in the area. They bring this in, and when they go to land apply, winter irrigation has been identified as a time when the crops really can't uptake as well. So in looking at that, we said, you've got to install treatment, and you've got to increase your lagoon storage. And more acreage is also appropriate if it's low risk acres. So we worked with them to identify a plan that would get them to create all of that needed infrastructure to stop winter irrigation. Between now and then, for the winter application period, they are restricted to applying on low risk acres. These are areas where there is not a drinking water well around, and they are south of the areas where there are domestic wells. So it's really a system where they have got to focus on those low risk acres, and there are high penalties if they don't. So
but you sort of strayed away from the question of why not just tell them to stop until all that stuff's in place. All the treatment so they can take the nitrates out of the water and all that and make it safe again.
Well, there's two reasons. I think you've seen the pie chart and you're aware of how much the port actually contributes.
Something like 5%
to the overall.
8%. Yeah.
Well, that's all land appliers, is about 4.6%.
Okay.
So generously, let's say the port is that entire 4.6%. If they stop all of their land application tomorrow, those wells are not clean. That drinking water is not really any better. So to me, we have a lose-lose proposition if the port is shut down or prohibited from taking food processed water because we impact the food processors. My understanding is half the people in that region are employed directly or indirectly by the port, the food processors, and the farmers that produce the food. So the lose-lose there is that we impact jobs and we do not improve groundwater. We do not improve drinking water. I want a win-win in this area. The win-win is that people are drinking safe water, healthy water, and that we work with the port on sustainable solutions, that we require that they put in sustainable treatment and infrastructure systems that they have never had before. So that's what I'm working toward. And right now we have the ability to provide people with that safe drinking water through OHA, and we're committed to continuing that program.
Okay, so what's next? The director says in the short term, she wants to make sure that anyone in that region who wants or needs their well tested will get it done for free, and anyone with contaminated water will get free deliveries. And yes, free does mean it's paid for by the taxpayers. Right now, 424 properties across Morrow and Umatilla counties get free water. In the medium term, she wants to work with communities there to see how they can get people away from using their wells for water. How can they be connected to city water or create their own water districts? And long term, she says it will take decades to figure out how to clean up the contaminated water near Boardman, Oregon. By the way, our conversation lasted much longer than we've shown you here. It's about 25 minutes, way too much time. But we will be posting the entire raw interview on our KGW YouTube page. That's KGW YouTube. You should check it out. And finally, what do you think about all this? Send me an email, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The phone number is 503-226-5090. Keep it right here. The story continues right after this. Portland is a city famous for its protests and sometimes riots. Portland police used to have a team of about 50 officers specially trained to respond to those things, but they all quit the team back in June of 2021 when one of their members was charged with assaulting a protester. Now, with a possible tumultuous election season approaching, the city is trying to build the team again. Blair Best reports.
If you look closely, you can still see scars in the form of plywood on government buildings, left over from Portland protests 4 years ago.
Just how out of control it was. The whole city is going down.
It kind of squashed any sort of folks wanting to come downtown, so it was not good.
Nobody anywhere in this country saw what Portland saw in 2020.
As an election season nears, the City and Police Bureau are preparing for the potential of more violence.
I hope that we don't ever see what we saw in 2020 again, but we need to have the tools and the people ready to navigate what may come.
Part of those tools, Aaron Schmautz with the Portland Police Association says, is creating a new team trained to respond to violent protests.
It's important that we have a structure in place.
If they do their job, it's a great thing, to help keep everybody safe.
The Bureau will be looking for 40 existing officers to volunteer. They'll do extra crowd control training and get a 6% pay raise each time they respond to a protest, costing the Bureau an additional $380,000 per year.
The pay piece of it is just the start. The next piece of the conversation is politically, how do we make sure that our officers have clear direction from our government?
Direction that was missing 4 years ago when a Portland police officer was indicted on a 4th-degree misdemeanor assault charge after hitting a photographer in the head with his baton during a 2020 protest. That charge was dismissed and he publicly apologized. This is Juan Chavez with the Oregon Justice Resource Center.
Coming out of 2020, several things happened. A lot of people were hurt and needed compensation, so they sued, and the city has now paid out over $1 million to protesters that they injured in that time. The Department of Justice got involved and ordered that the city do audits.
That audit found the Bureau needed more training and a designated crowd control unit, among other things.
More training is better training, I think, in a lot of people's eyes.
Like de-escalation techniques and finding alternative use of force.
The use of sticks or the use of batons or just the physical fighting between officers and the public, that is the last thing that we want.
Unless there's actual accountability measures that are built into this, if the officers who were involved in the 2020 protests do not volunteer or get involved in this, I don't see how this turns out any different.
City Council is set to vote on this Wednesday as the community braces for what could come in the months ahead.
I would expect there's protests on both sides. It's like there's a lot to think about, and this election season will be very interesting.
My hope is that we go through this election season and we have healthy, robust conversations about our political differences, and we do that without the police even being present. That would be a healthy city.
The mayor's office tells us more announcements about this potential crowd control unit will be coming soon, as early as later this week. And if the plan is approved, the first officer training will be in May down in Salem. Blair Best, KGW News.
When the Oso landslide hit 10 years ago this week, 43 people in Snohomish County, Washington lost their lives. But a mother and her baby who were swept up in the mud somehow survived. Ever since that day, our colleagues in Seattle have kept in touch with baby Duke and his mom, Amanda. And tonight, Jake Wittenberg brings us an update on their lives filled with new challenges.
There's a very comforting calmness out there. I remember every single detail of it, like it was yesterday. Of course, there's daily memories.
Okay, as far as we can tell, we only have one more victim out here. She's currently trapped and we're trying to extricate. She has a possible broken leg and a laceration to her head.
Sorry, I'm trying not to cry. I think that's probably the loneliest I've ever felt.
Lonely for Amanda Siddharth the day she and her home were swept up in the Oso landslide. 10 years later, the pain is still raw.
Who do we got?
Remembering being trapped under the debris.
She had a baby
with her newborn baby Duke in her arms. And the image she can't erase from her memory.
Just sitting there, watching him turn blue and his head swelling up, and there was nobody coming to get us at the moment. I don't know, I just sat there praying that if he did go, it wouldn't be in front of me.
We have one red patient. One patient will be ready for airlift transport in approximately 5 to 10 minutes.
Amanda and Duke were the first to be rescued from the mud, even before firefighters understood the enormity of the disaster. It was a local logger named Quinn Nations that helped cut broken trees away to finally reach them and comfort Amanda through her pain. Her neighbors were among the 43 who died on that day when the rain-soaked hillside above Steelhead Haven Drive suddenly collapsed. That day began a lifetime of doctor's visits.
So I have titanium mesh in my left eye socket. I have 3 plates in my left arm, a rod down my right leg, 2 plates in my left ankle, and now I get to wear a brace every day. Come here, Duke.
Today,
have a seat, my friend.
10-year-old Duke provides a daily reminder too.
Hi, buddy.
Hey.
Okay, so make sure he looks not towards the sun, but you have to listen to direction, okay?
My name is Duke. I am 10 years old.
Life's journey after the landslide.
Keep going.
From first steps.
I know a duck call.
To the path he walks today has been difficult. A life story all his own.
I have some holes on my skull and a left peripheral of the skull's brain gone.
Left peripheral is your eyesight, honey.
Oh, yeah. Well, then it might be the right side, so. It's hard to tell when you got a gun.
Long term is a lot of I don't knows. Right now, it's just daily seizures, but who's kicking their seizure butts?
Hey.
I'm sorry I said butts.
Duke's old enough to know the effects of that day may be permanent, and old enough to sometimes wish they weren't.
It's like I try and run away from it. It's been like that for years in my head. It's been like, how am I gonna get this away from me? How am I gonna get rid of it?
Oh. Look, your duck call worked. I think he kind of defines himself as, I was Duke from the landslide. I was baby Duke. As much as we try, not fight it or hide it, it's just, I don't want him to be a victim forever.
There's a special bond between these two, and now with a brother.
He's so good with Duke though. If Duke has a seizure, he'll like run straight to him.
New memories are connected to old ones.
Okay, come here, Q. Do you want me to hold you or are you good?
I'm good.
So Quinn was named after Quinn Nations, who was one of the loggers that sat with me the day of the slide. I felt like it was a no-brainer to name little Q after big Q. I don't think anyone could understand how important he was to me that day.
Life is a journey, and for the Siddharth family, it's a journey all their own, filled with challenges But for the future, there's hope, a feeling they know well.
It's permanently a part of us, good or bad.
Jake Wittenberg reporting. Tomorrow night, we'll hear from the first search and rescue team to see the devastation from the air.
Trying to get oriented when we flew over the ridge, because we would cue off that community to make our turn, and that community's gone.
Wow. The important role they played in reaching survivors and some of the lifelong relationships they forged that day. That's tomorrow night on The Story. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. The good stuff is coming your way next, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.